Imagine you're a radio operator in 1976. You turn on your equipment, ready for another normal day, and suddenly, tap, 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 tap. A relentless mechanical knocking sound fills your headphones. It's not Morse code. It's not interference from a nearby station. It's something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. Within weeks, this sound appears everywhere. Amateur radio operators in California hear it. Military communications in Germany are disrupted by it. Pilots in Japan complain about it. Even your grandmother's favorite AM radio station is infected with this rhythmic, pounding noise that sounds exactly like a woodpecker hammering on a tree. But this isn't a bird. This is something far more sinister. This is a signal so powerful it could be detected on the other side of the planet, so mysterious that it sparked international incidents, and so massive that its source required one of the largest structures ever built by human hands. Today, you're going to discover the truth behind the Russian woodpecker. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what this structure was, why it was built in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, what dark secrets it was hiding, and how it connects to the worst nuclear disaster in human history. This isn't just a story about technology. This is a story about paranoia, power, and the terrifying lengths nations will go to in the name of security. Let's begin. Quick reminder, hit that like button right now if you're already hooked. It genuinely helps more people discover these incredible stories. The year is 1976. The Cold War is at its peak. Trust between the Soviet Union and the Western world is non-existent. And then, without warning, without explanation, a new sound enters the global airwaves. Radio operators called it many things. The Russian woodpecker, the Duga signal. Some simply called it the buzzer. But whatever name you used, the effect was the same. This signal was everywhere, and it was ruining everything. The sound operated on shortwave frequencies, specifically between 3 and 30 megahertz. These frequencies were crucial for long-distance communication. Commercial broadcasts, military operations, aviation communications, amateur radio enthusiasts, everyone relied on these bands. And suddenly, all of them were being jammed by this repetitive, 10 pulses per second knocking sound. The signal wasn't subtle. It was incredibly powerful. Some estimates suggest it was transmitting at over 10 megawatts of power. To put that in perspective, most commercial radio stations operate at around 50 to 100 kilowatts. This thing was operating at 100 times that power. It was so strong that it could induce voltage in long telephone lines. People reported hearing the woodpecker sound through their landline phones, even when they weren't on a call. The international community was furious. The Soviet Union was violating international telecommunications agreements. Countries filed complaints. The International Telecommunication Union held meetings. Amateur radio operators organized campaigns to track and document the interference. But Moscow remained silent. No explanations, no apologies, no acknowledgement that anything unusual was even happening. This silence only fueled speculation. What was the purpose of this signal? Was it a weapon? A communication system? Something even more sinister? Some theories suggested it was a mind control experiment, broadcasting at frequencies that could influence human brainwaves. Others believed it was a massive jamming operation designed to cripple Western communications in preparation for war. The most paranoid theorists claimed it was part of a weather control system, capable of manipulating atmospheric conditions to create droughts or storms over enemy territory. But beneath all the speculation, a few dedicated researchers began piecing together the truth. And that truth would prove to be almost as extraordinary as the wildest theories. Triangulation is a beautiful thing. If you have receivers in multiple locations, you can determine where a signal is coming from by comparing when it arrives at each location. Radio enthusiasts around the world began this process almost immediately. The results were consistent and troubling. The signal was coming from somewhere deep inside the Soviet Union, from a region near the Ukrainian city of Chernobyl. Now, in 1976, Chernobyl was just another Soviet city. The nuclear power plant existed, but it was unremarkable. Just another piece of the Soviet Union's ambitious nuclear energy program. Nobody outside of Ukraine had any reason to pay attention to it. But the signal was definitely coming from somewhere near there. And as more sophisticated analysis was performed, researchers began to understand that whatever was creating the signal had to be enormous. Over-the-horizon radar, that's what it was. A technology that had been theoretical for decades, but never successfully implemented at this scale. The principle is fascinating. Instead of detecting objects in a direct line of sight, you bounce radio waves off the ionosphere, that layer of the atmosphere filled with charged particles. These waves travel in a curve, allowing you to detect objects thousands of kilometers away, far beyond the normal horizon. This was the holy grail of Cold War surveillance. If you could build a radar system that could see over the horizon, you could detect incoming bombers or missiles with enough advance warning to mount a defense. You could see what your enemy was doing before they were anywhere near your borders. But building such a system required immense power. It required enormous antennas. It required computing capabilities at the absolute cutting edge of what was possible in the 1970s. And the Soviet Union had built it. If you're finding this as mind-blowing as I did, subscribe and turn on notifications. We explore hidden history like this every week. The official designation was Duga, which translates roughly to arc or curve in Russian, a reference to the curved path of the radar signal bouncing off the ionosphere. But the structure itself was anything but subtle or curved. It was brutal, angular, and absolutely massive. Picture this: a steel lattice structure stretching nearly 500 feet into the sky. That's taller than a 40-story building. And it wasn't just tall, it was wide, extending over 2,000 feet horizontally. Nearly half a kilometer of steel framework bristling with antenna arrays. The entire structure resembled a gigantic metallic comb standing on end. Multiple vertical antenna elements arranged in precise geometric patterns, all designed to focus and direct radio energy towards specific points in the ionosphere. This wasn't just one installation either. The Soviets built two primary Duga arrays. The first, Duga 1, was located near the town of Chernobyl 2 in Ukraine. The second, Duga 2, was positioned in Siberia near Komsomolsk-on-Amur. Together, these installations provided coverage of the entire western and eastern approaches to the Soviet Union. The construction process was staggering. Thousands of workers, hundreds of thousands of tons of steel, years of effort in remote locations under conditions of absolute secrecy. The workers themselves often didn't know what they were building. Compartmentalization was extreme. You knew your specific task and nothing more. The cost? That's harder to determine. Soviet accounting wasn't exactly transparent, but modern estimates suggest the program cost billions of rubles, equivalent to hundreds of millions of dollars at the time. Some sources claim it consumed as much as 7% of the Soviet military budget during its construction phase. And the power requirements were equally staggering. To generate the radio waves necessary for over-the-horizon detection, Duga needed massive amounts of electricity. Consistent, reliable, abundant electricity. Which brings us to a very interesting question. Why build Duga 1 near Chernobyl? The Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant was not an accident of geography. It was a deliberate choice, positioned to serve multiple purposes within the Soviet industrial and military complex. By 1976, when the Duga Radar began operations, Chernobyl had 2 reactors online. These were RBMK reactors, a Soviet design that was powerful, relatively inexpensive to build, and as we would later discover, fundamentally flawed in its safety systems. But in the mid-1970s, Chernobyl was simply a reliable source of enormous electrical power. Each reactor could generate 1,000 megawatts of electricity, more than enough to power cities, factories, and yes, a massive over-the-horizon radar system that required consistent, high-power electrical supply. The connection between Duga and Chernobyl was direct. Dedicated power lines ran from the plant to the radar installation. When Duga was operating at full power, it was consuming electricity at a rate that would power a small city. But there was another reason for the location: secrecy. The area around Chernobyl too, that's what the Soviets called the secret city built to support the Duga Radar, was heavily restricted. You couldn't simply wander into the area. The entire region was controlled military territory. Guards, fences, checkpoints, patrols. The Soviet Union had become expert at hiding massive installations in plain sight by making them impossible to reach. The official story to local civilians was vague. Something about experimental communications research or training facilities for technical personnel. The massive antenna structure visible on the horizon? Just part of the industrial landscape of the Soviet Union. Don't ask questions. And for the most part, people didn't. In the Soviet system, curiosity about military installations was dangerous. Better to mind your own business, do your job, and not wonder too much about what was happening over there beyond the fences. But the connection between Duga and Chernobyl was about to become more significant than anyone could have imagined. Because in just 10 years, one of these facilities would become the site of humanity's worst nuclear disaster, and the other would become a haunting monument, forever linked to that catastrophe. Make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss where this story goes next. To understand why Duga was built, you need to understand the nightmare scenario that haunted Soviet military planners throughout the Cold War. Imagine you're a Soviet air defense commander in 1975. American B-52 bombers, carrying nuclear weapons, are stationed in Europe and Alaska. American intercontinental ballistic missiles sit in silos across the United States, ready to launch within minutes. And beneath the ocean, undetectable submarine-launched ballistic missiles lurk, capable of striking from any direction. Your job is to stop these weapons. But you have a huge problem. You can't see them coming until it's almost too late. Conventional radar is limited by the horizon. Radio waves travel in straight lines, so your radar can only see objects within its line of sight. That's about 30 kilometers for a low-flying aircraft, maybe a few hundred for high-altitude targets. Bombers flying low to avoid detection could be on top of you before you even knew they were there. Missiles launched from submarines would give you only minutes of warning. What Soviet planners desperately needed was a way to see thousands of kilometers away. They had to detect threats the moment they launched, giving them time to scramble fighters, activate missile defenses, or, in the worst-case scenario, launch a counterstrike before their own weapons were destroyed. Over-the-horizon radar was the answer. By bouncing powerful radio signals off the ionosphere, a layer of the Earth's atmosphere, Duga could see over the curve of the planet, detecting objects up to 3,000 kilometers away. A bomber taking off from a base in Germany would be visible to Duga immediately. A missile launching from a submarine in the North Atlantic would appear on Soviet screens within seconds. The system worked by transmitting powerful radio pulses. These pulses would travel up, strike the ionosphere, and bounce back down to Earth far beyond the normal radar horizon. When these pulses hit an aircraft or missile, a tiny fraction of the signal would reflect back, following the same path in reverse. Sophisticated receivers would detect this faint return, and powerful computers would calculate the target's position, speed, and trajectory. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice, making it work was extraordinarily difficult. The ionosphere isn't stable. It changes with the time of day, the season, and solar activity. Signals that worked perfectly in the morning might fail completely by afternoon. Duga had to constantly adjust its frequencies and beam patterns to maintain reliable detection. And then there was the sheer computing challenge. processing the returns, filtering out noise, and distinguishing real targets from false alarms required computing power that pushed Soviet technology to its absolute limits. But they made it work. And for years, Duga operated as one of the most powerful early warning systems in the world, scanning the skies for threats that might never come. While the world wondered about the mysterious woodpecker signal, thousands of people lived and worked in the secret city built to support it. Chernobyl, too, wasn't on any official maps. Mail sent there used a cover address in a different city. The entire facility was classified, and its personnel held top-level security clearances. But despite the secrecy, life in Chernobyl, too, was, in many ways, better than in a typical Soviet city. This was a military installation of strategic importance, which meant it received priority resources. The apartments were newer, the food was better, and consumer goods were more available. The Soviet Union took care of its strategic assets, and that included the people who operated them. The work itself was demanding. Duga operated 24 hours a day. Teams of technicians monitored the systems, maintained the equipment, and watched screens for any sign of a threat. Military discipline was strict. You came to work, did your job, and went home. What happened inside the facility stayed inside the facility. And always, in the background, was the massive antenna dominating the skyline, a constant reminder of the mission's importance and the power of the Soviet state. But there were also rumors, whispers about health problems among workers who spent too much time near the transmitters. Stories about equipment malfunctions causing dangerous power surges. But in the Soviet system, you didn't question the safety of strategic military installations. You trusted that precautions had been taken. And just a few kilometers away, at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, workers operated under similar assumptions. The reactors were safe because Soviet scientists had designed them. Nothing could go wrong because the system was infallible. Until it wasn't. Stay with me. This is where everything connects in the most unexpected way. The story of the Chernobyl disaster has been told many times, but its connection to the Russian woodpecker adds a layer of tragedy that's often overlooked. In the early hours of April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl plant exploded during a safety test, releasing massive amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere. The immediate death toll was small, but the long-term consequences were staggering. The radioactive plume spread across Europe. Hundreds of thousands of people were evacuated. The city of Pripyat, home to 50,000, was abandoned forever. But here's what's rarely discussed. The disaster effectively ended the Duga program. Chernobyl, too, the secret city for the Duga operators, was right in the evacuation zone. The facility was contaminated. Personnel were relocated. Operations were suspended. Without reliable power from the Chernobyl plant, and without a crew to operate it, Duga became obsolete almost overnight. By 1989, the system was officially decommissioned. The massive antennas were abandoned, the buildings sealed, and the secret city was left to decay. The tragedy goes deeper than just the timing. Some researchers have proposed a darker connection. Remember, Duga consumed enormous amounts of electricity. The Chernobyl plant was under constant pressure to produce that power. The safety test being performed on April 26th was designed to see if the reactor could power essential systems during a shutdown. While the official story mentions cooling systems, some have speculated that maintaining power to strategic military installations, like Duga, might have been a factor in the pressure to complete the test, despite growing concerns about the reactor's behavior. There's no direct evidence, and the disaster had multiple causes, but the connection is there. These two massive Soviet projects, built in the name of security, shrouded in secrecy, were literally and figuratively linked. When one failed catastrophically, it took the other down with it. The collapse of the Soviet Union brought new information, but also new mysteries. As documents were declassified, the true nature of Duga became clear. But that didn't stop the speculation. One persistent theory claims the Chernobyl disaster wasn't an accident, but was deliberate sabotage by foreign agents to disable Duga. This theory doesn't hold up to scrutiny. The disaster was too complex and rooted in design flaws and human error to have been orchestrated. Another theory suggests Duga was actually a weapon capable of influencing weather or even human psychology. This has even less evidence. The physics of over-the-horizon radar are well understood and don't allow for such effects. The truth, as usual, is both more mundane and more interesting. Duga was exactly what it appeared to be, a massive, expensive attempt to solve a strategic problem. It worked, more or less, for about a decade. Then circumstances and disaster made it obsolete. Today, the Duga Radar stands as one of the most haunting structures on Earth. You can visit it now as part of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone tours. Tourists walk through the abandoned buildings of Chernobyl 2, stand beneath the massive steel lattice, and look up at this monument to Cold War ambition. The structure itself is remarkably intact. The transmitter buildings are empty shells, but the presence of this place remains. This was a place of enormous power, and now it's silent. Radiation levels vary. Some parts are relatively safe for short visits. Others remain dangerously contaminated. Graffiti covers the walls. Nature is slowly reclaiming the site. Trees grow between buildings, and wildlife has returned to the exclusion zone, thriving in the absence of humans. And through it all, Duga stands, rusting slowly but still defiant against the sky. A memorial to the thousands who worked there and lived there. So what do we take away from the story of the Russian woodpecker? It's a story about the Cold War, yes, about technological ambition and military necessity. But it's also a story about hubris, about building massive projects without fully understanding the consequences. The Soviet Union built Duga believing it would provide decades of advantage. It operated for barely 10. They built Chernobyl believing their nuclear technology was superior and safe. Instead, they created the worst nuclear disaster in history. Both projects are now abandoned monuments to a fallen empire. The next time you hear about a massive project that's going to change everything, remember the Russian woodpecker. Remember that the most powerful signals eventually go silent, and even the largest structures eventually rust. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into hidden history. Drop a comment below telling me what other Cold War mysteries you want explored. I read every single one. And if you really want to support the channel, share this video with someone who loves history, technology, or just incredible true stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.